Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum to all our participants. I'm your host Marathi Bali, and just we are waiting for our speaker, Dr. Khalid Zaheer, to be online. He is experiencing some technical issues, unfortunately, and he will be online at any second now. Right. Just wait for the while. We are waiting for Dr. Khalid Zaheer to be online. He's facing some technical issues at his end. We appreciate your patience to be on hold. Thank you. जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम डॉक्टर साहब can you hear us?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Dr. Saab, you can hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me as well?
Yes, Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah for coming and making an effort to come on online. So you can start your session,
But
please.
there was a technical problem that caused me to be late. I could not get through to it, and I'm sorry again that I cannot be seen. I'll be only heard. Probably that's not a bad idea.
No problem. No problem. Jazakallah. We can see your screen sharing. I think you are logging from your smartphone.
No, no, it's my. I'm using my mobile for the purpose. Somehow it didn't work on my. It didn't work on my laptop.
I see. No
So,
problem.
Dr.
Sure
Saab,
how to.
can you press the stop sharing button? So it'll probably be
Okay.
then easier on your
Okay.
mobile phone. Yeah.
Right. Right. That's fine. But there's no way I can show the picture. No.
What did you want to share?
No, no. You can't see me, so there's no way we can do it when I'm using my camera, my mobile.
Hmm. Yeah, they haven't given that option in there.
Right. No problems. No problems. I think so long as you can hear me, I think that's good enough.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, do we start?
Yes, please.
So, are you giving me the signal?
I know you can go ahead, please. You can start. The audience is waiting for you.
All right.
Jazakallah.
The first segment that we do in this program is on a segment on a passage from the Quran. And as you know that I have been picking some verses um, from the Quran in a certain sequence. And the chapter that I have been reading from is Surah AlAraf, which is the seventh chapter of the Quran. Uh, Last time I talked about the incident that was mentioned in the chapter regarding the Almighty's mention of the incident when all humans were
Dr. Sir, we can't hear you. We're sorry about that. Hello, Dr. Sir, we can't hear you. Yes, Brother Mustaq.
can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Sorry,
Thank you.
sorry, I don't know how to get off.
No, that's okay.
Today I am
Jazakallah.
going to present for you a verse from uh, the next surah, which is Surah Al-Anfal. Surah Al-Anfal, if you look at the sequence of the surahs, it belongs to the second group of the Quranic surahs. This second group is comprised of four surahs, four chapters. Surah Al-An'am, sixth surah. Surah Al-Araf, seventh. Surah Al-Anfal, eighth. And Surah At-Tawbah, ninth. Uh, these four surahs present the Almighty's message of informing us that when the messenger of God, the Rasul of God, may God's mercy be on him, came with God's message and he delivered it to his nation most clearly in a manner that people had no excuse to reject it. There came a time when the Almighty decided and declared that they are going to be punished. Like it was God's way of dealing with nations that were visited by messengers earlier on in the previous occasions. Uh, and those who were the companions of the Prophet got the privilege of succeeding in this life. This arrangement the Almighty used to make in order for humanity to know about the fact that accountability in the life hereafter is a certainty. When God can arrange for his messenger and his companions to prevail, to succeed over those who rejected him, despite them being large in number and strong militarily, when he can do it in this world and destroy them, then the claim that in the next life God is going to punish those who will turn out to be evil and would reward those who would perform well morally in the worldly life, that claim stands validated. It is what we might say is proved as certain. So, in this group, the Almighty has presented this understanding in a sequence whereby the first surah chapter of the group, Surah AlAraf, presents invitation to the people who were the immediate addressees of the last prophet, may Allah's blessing on him. Invitation is followed by warning in Surah AlAraf, which a few verses of which we have discussed in the last few sessions. That surah is followed by Surah AlAnfal, a few verses of which we will talk about in the next few sessions. And then this surah is actually surah preparation. It is preparing Muslims for becoming tools of the Almighty's plan, his project of inflicting punishment on the people who rejected the messenger. So it's a chapter, it's a surah preparing believers for the important task of implementing God's will. And the surahs following this surah is Surah Tawbah, which is the surah, the chapter of punishment, which is therefore a surah that does not begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, because that beginning mentions most effectively the Almighty's mercy. And the surah is talking about people who, because of their wrong attitude, caused themselves to be deprived of God's mercy and therefore be punished. Now, in this third surah, which is preparing Muslims to be morally, spiritually, and militarily prepared for inflicting God's punishment on the people who rejected the message of God. It is talking about the reason why these people are to be punished. Why is it that the Almighty has decided that they do not deserve His mercy anymore? So, one verse, a very small verse, which talks about the fact, quite apart from many other reasons, is what is mentioned in what is verse 22. It mentions, Inna sharra dawab bi'indallah. Indeed, the worst beasts in the eyes of God, as-summul bukmul lazina la yaqilun, are those who are deaf, dumb, the ones who don't use their intellect. In other words, the Almighty is saying that those people who do not use God-given intellect properly are the ones who are deaf and dumb. And these are the people who are the worst humans, worst creatures in the eyes of God. That essentially means that God Almighty wants us humans to use our intellects. He wants us to understand, to think, to listen to what others are saying, and to speak what is correct, what is just, what is fair. So he says that indeed the worst kind of beasts, sharrat dawab in the law, in the eyes of God, As-summul bukmul lazina la yaqilun are the people who are deaf, dumb, and those are the ones who don't use their intellect. Incidentally, in the second part of my presentation, I am going to continue with a discussion on the question as to whether intellect can be used for the purpose of understanding religion or not. And one of the verses that I would present there too is this verse. Because if the Almighty is condemning people for not using their intellect so strongly, how could it be possible for any religious person who knows the Quran to claim that in Islam the Almighty demands from its followers that they do not use their intellect, they should just follow the message blindly. The Almighty is mentioning here most clearly that those people who don't use their intellect are the ones who are deaf. That is, they have ears, they can hear what others are saying, but they do not take it seriously. They do not want to understand what others are saying. They have tongues with which they can speak, but they speak only what is senseless, tasteless, what is not worthy of speaking. Therefore, they are dumb. And these are the people who, because they have not, they have decided not to use their intellect properly, the most important gift, blessing of the Almighty. Therefore, they are, in the eyes of God, worse than beasts. That takes me to the second segment of my presentation, wherein I mention uh, some aspect of the learning of Islam, our religion. And if you would kindly recall, I had started the discussion on beliefs. And I mentioned that in order for us to understand beliefs, that is, belief in God, belief in prophets, messengers, and belief in the life hereafter, uh, we need to first sort out this question, which is quite often raised by people, some religious people, who say that in Islam, we are not allowed to use our intellect. We are just expected to follow what is given. Uh, I mentioned in my previous presentations, I have as yet gone through uh, the understanding of the use of intellect in the last two of our meetings. And I mentioned that there are a number of arguments which people who do not agree with the idea of using intellect in religion, they present. And I've already dealt with the question of faith bil ghaib, and it clarified that yu'minuna bil ghaib, they believe in the unseen, is a mention which does not deny the role of intellect while understanding religion. In fact, quite the contrary, it is actually a mention which expects believers to use their intellect as properly as possible. The other question, the other uh, verse which is employed as an argument was the verse that said, believers do not ask questions at the time when the Quran is being revealed. Questions which, if you ask, are going to cause harm to you. I mentioned that this too is not a sound argument to deny and reject the use of intellect in Islam, because the verse itself is clarifying that it is a demand, it is an expectation of the Almighty that He made when the Quran was being revealed and His Sharia law was being given to believers, The law that the Almighty knew uh, was to be given in a certain way uh, without going into the details of it, so that believers get the facility of understanding the law in accordance with their own respective circumstances. They should not be given a detailed law that would cause them to be constrained unnecessarily. So, if believers were to ask questions regarding the details of the Sharia that was being revealed, then it would have caused harm to believers rather than help them out. So God Almighty uh, asked them not to use their, not to ask questions about such matters. And there was an example of a cow that was asked to be slaughtered by the Almighty, which when this instruction was given, the children of Israel, they asked silly, unnecessary questions about the details of the kind of cow that was needed to be slaughtered. Obviously, any cow was expected to be slaughtered, but unfortunately, those people who were not interested in implementing the Almighty's expectations started asking unnecessary questions. So those kind of questions have been discouraged. I also clarified that when the Almighty says that believers should listen and obey, it's a very reasonable and rational demand, because a believer is the one who already accepts the messenger as the representative of God. And if he is asking the prophet to describe, clarify, and justify each and every instruction from God, then probably there is something wrong in the manner the individual has accepted the messenger as God's representative. Most certainly, the right behavior of a believer should be that he gets instructions from the messenger and follow them uh, unhesitatingly. However, that doesn't really mean that believing in the messenger it's himself and the question of following religion should be done without intellect. The Quran, we shall see later, has mentioned lots of arguments to support the reality that Muhammad, God's mercy be on him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the messenger of God. So, when the Quran is presenting arguments after arguments to prove the case of its claim that the Prophet is indeed God's representative, then obviously no one can come up with with a claim that in our religion we are not allowed to use our intellect simply because the Almighty is asking uh, believers to listen and obey. I also mentioned in my last presentation the fact that uh, predestination uh, is a subject discussion on which was not encouraged by the Prophet, may God mercy on him, when he found that some of his companions were indulged in that discussion and had gone too far. He stopped them from doing it and asked them to refrain from that discussion. And I clarified that it was not uh, an injunction, it was not an expectation that was meant to discourage use of intellect. It was an expectation that had to do with use of intellect in a matter, in a certain area of understanding, or call it area of faith, that was beyond the reach of the human intellect, because of the fact that it was a matter that had to do with God's complete infinite knowledge and God's complete infinite justice. These two attributes, when they are both to be simultaneously employed uh, the end result would be that on the one hand, God would know because He's completely knowledgeable what people do or they're going to do in the future. God would know it beforehand, but because God is also perfectly just, He would not cause anyone to be punished simply because God knew what the person is going to do beforehand. Uh, Grasping the two realities together simultaneously, absorbing it, is beyond the reach of our intellect, which is very useful otherwise. But like all other human faculties, our intellect too has its limitations. It is not unlimited. Finally, I mentioned that there are people who claim that in the case of masa, rubbing of socks uh, while doing wuzu, the concession that was provided to us by the Prophet, may God mercy be on him, there are people who talk about the fact that Ali radiallahu anhu, one of the greatest scholars of Islam and the companion of the Prophet, may God mercy be on him, it is claimed, is reported to have said that if in Islam there was a role of intellect uh, in understanding religion, then we would have been asked to rub our socks while doing masa from underneath our feet rather than on the upper part of the feet. Because, as is claimed, he said the lower part of feet get dirty, soiled, and not the upper part of the feet. So, because our religion is based on hukum, on God's orders and the Prophet's instructions, therefore we follow his orders irrespective of whether we understand those orders or not. And we do know that some of the instructions are not consistent with our intellect, and yet we follow them because they are God's instructions and they cannot be defied. The fact of the matter is that we've discussed it in the case of hadith, that when we are to accept the claim that the Prophet, may Allah's mercy be on him, said a certain thing or did a certain thing, uh, we are expected not only to see as if the claim has come down to us through a chain of narrators who were reliable. That is the criterion of riwayat that you see with the people who are making a claim or the people who were involved in enabling the information to come down to us. Were all of them reliable or not? If any one of them or a few of them would appear to us as unreliable people, uh, we would not accommodate that statement as a part of the hadith literature, which is completely acceptable. Likewise, there is another criterion or principle of scrutinizing hadith, which is the principle of darayat. You look at the statement that is attributed to the Prophet, may God mercy be on him, and see as to whether uh, it could have been said by him. Is it possible that the Prophet could have said such and such thing? He couldn't have said anything against the Quran. He couldn't have said anything against the established Sunnah. He couldn't have said anything that was contradicting his own statements. He couldn't have said anything against the common sense. So this principle or criterion of Darayat is also what is acknowledged and recognized as an established principle scrutinizing hadith. The same should also obviously be applicable in the case of statements attributed to the companions of the Prophet, more particularly those companions who were renowned and were very close to him and were uh, the people who were chosen by the Almighty to be to get the company of the Prophet for a number of years, for them to be his true representatives even after his death. Ali radiallahu anhu was one of them. So it's not possible for us to imagine that he could have said anything about God's religion that would not be an explanation of God's religion. I'm saying it because we know that the concessions allowed by the Almighty in the category of Masa is not very different from the concession allowed in the case of Tayammum. We are normally expected to be in a state of wudu before we say our prayers. Wudu, we know, is an exercise, a ritual we go through uh, with the help of water. We use water to cleanse some parts of our body for us to be purified symbolically, and some part of our body is actually is cleansed through water. However, when water is not available, the Almighty expects us to do tayammum, which is symbolic cleansing. And this symbolic cleansing does not clean us. It's just symbolically reminding us that as and when we will be able to get water, water is going to be available again. We will start doing wudu. So when water is not available, we are doing an exercise, a symbolic exercise of reminding ourselves through tayammum. We touch our hands on a clean surface, and we rub our face and our arms, hands and arms, and that suffices for the purpose of saying our prayers and is a replacement of wudu. It's symbolic. Likewise is the case with masa. Masa is not there for the purpose of cleaning our feet. It has been required or recommended simply as a symbolic reminder of the fact that if socks are going to be removed, then we will wash our feet and not rub them. So it seems that there is something wrong in the manner this claim has been presented in the name of Ali radiallahu anhu. Otherwise, we know quite well the reason why Masa has been allowed in Islam, and we also know that Masa does not, in any case, enable our socks to be cleansed. That finishes my second segment. Now I will talk about one problem, current problem that we Muslims are confronted with, call it a problem or a challenge. I talked about the population increase and its control, and the controversy that was there. Today, I will talk about the question of living with the non-Muslims and sharing some of their religious matters. Uh, it's a it's a discussion which should include a number of different possibilities of sharing uh, religious rituals or or attending some part of the religious rites of other religions. Should we do it or should we not do it? Uh, Right now, I would like to talk about the possibility of attending the congregational prayers and the rites and formalities, rituals of worship. Uh, should we do it or should we not do it? Um, I'm sure you people are more aware of the fact that when you are living in the West and you are talking to people about your religion, um, you're talking in many cases to people who are already attached to another religion. So there are Christians, there are Jews, there are Hindus, there are Sikhs, there are Buddhists that you come across. And obviously, when I'm mentioning these religions and their followers, uh, they have, in many cases, their own sects and denominations. And obviously, there are many other religions whose followers you get the experience of living with, dealing with, and talking to. So, what if somebody invites us to come to one of their gatherings? Should we go or should we not go? Uh, the fact of the matter is that if we were to invite a non Muslim to our masjid, which many Muslims do, and why should they not do? Because if we are to invite them to know what we are doing in the masjid, the way we are praying there, for them to be able to understand our religion, to get a feeling of it, to, let's face it, to be impressed by what we do in our religious exercises, in our acts of worship. Uh, why should we not do the same in turn when they invite us? My own position is, and obviously it's a matter that always be debated, that there is no harm in going to these places for the purpose of understanding what they are doing. You see, I cannot invite another person to my religion, to my faith, unless I know him properly. You have to first understand the other person, his or her background, and then you will put across God's message that you believe is the most authentic and relevant for our times to for the other person to know. So when you go to these places of worship, you get the first-hand knowledge, experience of what they're doing, and that can be a good starting point for you to talk about your religion and your faith. Uh, it is a good idea also because when you go to their places of worship, you have the opportunity of inviting them to your place of worship, your masjid. And when that begins to happen, you have a good opportunity of talking about what our religion says uh, in comparison with what other religions and religious traditions say. Uh, Obviously, there is no reason why we should fight, why we should raise our voices, why should we accuse other religious traditions of being wrong, unacceptable, etc. However, we do have a right, we do have a responsibility to inform the other religious groups, their members, that our religion is different from theirs in some ways. And at some stage, we have to talk to them about shirk, polytheism, we need to uh, tell them that our book says that it is not acceptable to the Almighty. Obviously, because it's a difficult statement to make, we will try to do it in a manner which is polite and yet clear. We have to be wise according to the Quran while we invite others towards the path of God. It is also an important exercise because because uh, we shall be able to understand our faith properly and fully only when we understand other faiths, experience what they are doing. When you go to other places of worship, when you talk to people belonging to other faiths, your understanding of your faith, your commitment to your faith is challenged. There are questions that are asked, that are raised, and that gives you a reason to understand your religion more properly. Quite often we are just blindly following our faith rituals. Why? Simply because our forefathers were doing, likewise, and we just followed them. Obviously, we know quite well that the Quran condemns the fact that people should just simply follow a certain religion or religious uh, exercise, a religious ritual, because her forefathers were doing it. So it's a good idea that we go there. But the final thing that I would want to say is that while we are there, we need to be careful that we do not do anything that would amount to shirk. We cannot participate in their rituals the way they are doing it. We can be observers over there, but we cannot actively get engaged in participating in their rituals. It seems to be a very exciting idea that you appear to be, you show yourself to appear very open minded, very accommodating by getting involved practically in what they're doing. But then, uh, we don't want to compromise our understanding. We want to understand others. We want to come close to them for our message to be put across to them properly. But in doing so, we will not sacrifice our faith. We will not compromise on our principles. We know that we are not allowed to do shirk. We would like to uh, politely, humbly, but allow me to say uh, passionately, the passion would be hidden deep down. We would like to ask others also to not get involved in shirk and polytheism. It's something which the Almighty condemns. But we will go there to see what they're doing. So, on the one hand, we have to very carefully preserve our faith, preserve our commitment to Tawheed, to monotheism. But on the other hand, we are not going to sever and break our relationship with our brothers and sisters belonging to other faiths because we would want them to know our faith and we would want a discussion on the differences on faith. This is important for our message to get across to them, A, and this is also important for us to understand our own message properly, B. That ends my part of the presentation, and now it's for you to ask questions and discuss matters.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Saab. Now, all participants, you can ask the question by raising your hand, or you can ask directly. Your all mics are on self-mute mode. Yeah, Sister Rafia has a question.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Khalid. Can you hear me?
Walaikum assalam. Yes, I can hear you.
One first comment about the other faiths. I have many times in my life abroad gone to the church with Christian friends to observe, and I found the atmosphere very tranquil and peaceful, and it's a very calming effect on me. Of course, I didn't take part in the ceremonies, but I think that I learned a lot from the way they behave in their church. So that's one point. Secondly, I wanted to point out that my parents made us read the Quran in Arabic with the Maulvi Sahib. We did the same thing to our children, and our children are doing the same thing to their children. So none of us have really understood the meaning of the Quran properly, as we don't know Arabic. So I would like some suggestion that how this can be changed, because even in the madrasas, the children are taught to learn it like a parrot, but they don't understand the meaning. So if you could put a little bit of light on this problem.
You see, as far as the first part of your statement is concerned, okay, I mean it's a obviously correct observation. You went to the church many times and you found the atmosphere congenial. You could observe, you could experience tranquility. But you should also bear in mind that what they are doing is actually uh, a worship that is done with an understanding that God has a son. And obviously, that is what we do not accept, what our text does not uh, allow. So, there is always going to be attention. I cautioned, when you go there is obviously always a challenge. Um, Allow me to say, I am a little uh, alarmed that we go to a place of worship where, uh, according to the understanding that we have, the manner God is approached is indirect, and we still feel good about it. But think about the fact that what they're doing is what we think is right. And obviously, we do not have any right to doubt their intentions. But we have a responsibility to, as much as is possible, let them know what they are doing is different from the understanding that we have. Now, I know it's a big challenge. I know it's very difficult. But then, obviously, that is exactly what we are expected to do as believers, as representatives of God Almighty's last message. So, tranquility, discipline, good behavior is all accepted that it's there. But obviously, there is uh, something unacceptable that is happening there, which is what should cause us to be worried about them and to also think about ways and means to put this important problem across to them. As far as the second question is concerned, I totally agree with you that it's a matter of serious concern for us that we have gone into an exercise of linking ourselves with the Quran in a way which doesn't serve the purpose why the Quran was revealed. I mean, the purpose of the revelation of the Quran was guidance. You cannot get guidance unless you understand. Uh, it was a decision taken by scholars of the subcontinent when Islam was introduced in this part of the world. When the companions of the Prophet went to outside the Arabian Peninsula, the lands that they invaded, they arranged for Arabic language to become the first language of the entire population. So there was no problem of understanding the Quran in the earlier times. However, when the message went to the subcontinent, to Malaysia, to Indonesia, and one exception in the earlier times to Persia, their local languages remained their uh, spoken languages of speech, of communication. So the right decision should have been, and I think if the wrong decision was taken, it needs to be corrected immediately. The right decision should have been to a top priority being given to the fact that those people, intelligent young people who can do it, they ought to learn Arabic, at least to the extent that would give them the ability to understand the Quran directly. There is no alternative to this arrangement, this decision to go for directly understanding the Quran. However, I concede that not everybody can go through that exercise. Learning a new language, more particularly when you are now in an advanced age and you're not young, is difficult. However, the second possibility is to read the Quran, yes, in its Arabic text as well, because that's what the Almighty's word is, but with the translation. So I think this is absolutely essential when uh, we are arranging for our kids to be introduced to the Quran so that they can read it. It has to be always the case that we should make sure that the Maulvi Sahib, the teacher, the guide who is teaching them the Quran, is not only enabling them to read the Arabic text, but is also telling them the meanings each time the Quran is taught.
Dr. Khalid, I just want to make one comment about the churches. I've traveled a lot to different countries and I've been to the churches just because I wanted to see what the church was like and if they're very beautiful. I agree that I didn't commit shirk, but it is very, very difficult and challenging to start arguing with somebody or saying that, okay, this is wrong. Jesus is not the Son of God. I, I admit my failure. I've tried. I haven't been able to do it for personal reasons, or maybe I don't have the confidence to be able to get the point across to them.
Uh, Let me admit that I too have not been exceedingly successful in doing it in some cases. You see, I remember I used to visit a family to just talk about matters of common interest. And the idea was that at some stage I will talk about religion. And we used to talk about religion, but to begin with, we were talking about only matters of commonalities. But I remember when I very humbly and politely mentioned the fact that, in my humble opinion, Jesus Christ was not the Son of God. The face of the gentleman turned red and he said to me that, were you not my guest, I would have thrown you out of this place. So yes, it's a difficult challenge, but it is not the same response in all cases. Some people are more open, so we need to try. If you get a response like the one I've mentioned, well, you've done your job. Obviously, I dared not go to them and talk about the same subject again. You are not responsible to deliver the message to the people who are not willing to accept it. However, we need to try as best as we can to be polite, wise in putting across our understanding. And I think the best way is, I now realize where I was wrong. I think the best way should be to talk about commonalities, to talk in a general manner, and give a good translation of the Quran in their language for them to read what the Almighty has mentioned themselves. And if they have any questions, they should talk to us rather than us telling them certain things which obviously are not going to be very acceptable to them to begin with.
Yeah, Jazakallah. Dr. Saab, I have a very quick question about the second part of your session, use of intellect in Islam. My question is there any other way or degree of understanding, excuse me, other than intellect, we can understand Islam, other than using the intellect? Because there are groups as well, they are very well established groups in the world who uh, consider the use of intellect in understanding of religion as an inferior or a low degree of experience. So they try to understand religion with high degree uh, of some other level of understanding or method. So what do you think about? Shall we
Yeah,
only use
very.
our intellect or other methods as well?
You see, apart from using intellect, as far as I can imagine, there are two other possibilities. One possibility is to simply blindly follow what you have received from your elders, both beliefs and rituals. Just go through the motions and just accept what your elders have given you. I think every reasonable person would agree uh, that this is certainly not an acceptable way of accepting and following a religion or religious beliefs. And that is what the Quran also condemns. And let's face it, that's what many Muslims, most Muslims are doing. They have accepted without any questioning, without any critical appraisal, the religious understanding that has been given to them by their elders, and they have also um, accepted all the formalities, rituals, without even bothering to know whether they are actually the requirement of their religion or not. The other way of becoming what you might call a religious person or of coming close to God is what people describe as through spiritual experience. That is, you attach yourself to a certain person or a certain group of people. Uh, you become a part of an environment where you go through exercises. You do exercises of breathing. You shut your eyes. You are meditating. You empty your mind. And then things start happening. Your spiritual leader, your murshid, would ask you to do certain things, which include, most certainly, in many cases, uh, azkar. You chant remembrance, certain words, names of the Almighty. and you do it in a manner, in a sequence, in certain numbers, and you also go through rituals. And the idea is that this is what is spiritualism. And obviously, that's not about all. They also go through uh, the process of disciplining themselves by leading a very strict life, by staying away from many of the worldly pleasures, by denying their desires to go beyond a limit, certain limit, and so on. So, the way people follow religion and believe that that's the most superior, the best way of doing it is to go through these exercises. And how do they know that what they're doing is right? Well, they claim that they have experiences. They claim that they see things. They can hear. They feel good from inside, and that's about enough for them to be satisfied that what they have with them is actually the right approach, the right religious understanding. Uh, as far as some people amongst them are concerned, they say, they claim that this is exactly what God has required. I'm talking about Muslims who do it. Because obviously, when you're talking about Muslims, you're talking about Islam, uh, you cannot uh, stay away from the Quran and the Hadith. So many of these people who who go through the understanding of Islam and its practice spiritually are the people who are Sufis, who follow uh, the Sufi way of practicing Islam. And in order for them to justify what they are doing from an Islamic point of view, they do it, they explain it by presenting certain verses and certain ahadith. Uh, well, if we get time, and hopefully in one of these presentations, I might summarize some of the points that there is to prove the point that the path that they are following is what the Almighty requires us to do, and that's the best way of coming close to God. And most certainly, in this way of approaching God, the use of intellect does not have a very important role.
Yeah, thank you. Sister Afia has another question.
Dr. Khalid, just one more comment. I have a family member is married to an American, so I have tried to get this across. But in return, I have been told, okay, many people, Muslims, believe in killing non-Muslims. So when when you get into this type of a discussion, it it really gets very, very difficult because they don't know the total picture, but they do know that many Muslims do believe in this, that kill all the non-Muslims. So it's forget my trying to prove to them that or convince them that okay, Jesus is not the son of God. First of all, they said this is our faith, and secondly, what answers can I give to them when they point out what some of our people are doing?
I think when we talk to non-Muslims about Islam, and also to some Muslims who, despite being Muslims, despite being born to Muslim families, are actually not convinced that Islam is the right way. When we talk to them, we should try as best as we can to convince them that there is a difference between Islam and what Muslims are doing. Don't understand Islam through Muslims. Obviously, people will not be easily, uh, you know, inclined to accept this argument. But obviously, there are ways of telling them that you would not understand Christianity through the behavior of somebody who is just a Christian by birth or going through a few rituals, goes to the church, once in a while. Tell them that Islam is found in the Quran, Sunnah, and its explanation is found in Hadith, which we keep struggling trying to understand properly. So show them the Quranic verses which are clearly mentioning that you cannot kill a human. Tell them the reasons why those people who are those Muslims who don't find it a problem killing fellow humans, why they have got a mistaken. But obviously, I do agree that you cannot do it except to the person who is willing to listen to you. So, when a person is not willing to listen to you, think about ways of bringing him to talk about it. Pray to the Almighty and just tell yourself that I am doing as best as I can. And if there is someone who is not willing to understand uh, at the moment, well, I have no responsibility of telling them. Because that's what the Almighty has mentioned clearly. Fazakir in nafa'at zikra. You remind them if reminding them benefits. Well, if it doesn't benefit, then it's none of your obligations.
Jazakallah. Sister Huma has a question. You can self-mute your mic, please, and ask the question.
Thank you, Ji. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Khalid. I just wanted to ask you a couple of things here, which a lot of people are going through in countries abroad. One is our children are exposed to non-Muslims here, obviously, and a lot of young Muslim women are marrying non-Muslims who perhaps some of them are not converting. And somehow it's funny, but the Muslim girls are the ones who don't want to force Islam on the boys, and they're getting into situations where obviously there are a lot of gray areas. And so for the ones who decide, despite knowing that the boy has to convert to Islam, and they still continue to get married, what is the status? That was question number one. Question number two was more about the legal system of a country, the registration of marriage versus the nikah. A lot of Muslims in England just do nikah, but when the marriages end, they're not registered in the law of the country, and the women have absolutely no right of protection by the state. And there is a huge issue which is happening all over the country in regards to women who are married through religious ceremonies but are not registered under the legal system of a country. So how do we tell the children what is important, because marriage is a contract, and how should they, is nikah and registration both mandatory, or what comes under mandatory, what comes under voluntary, and why? Thank you.
I will answer in the reverse order. You see, when you are living in a system and you have agreed to abide by the requirements of the system, Islam binds you to follow that system unless there is something clearly violating the Almighty's expectations. And if there are things, there are matters like those, then You either have a choice of making an attempt to change the system and ask it to accommodate your belief, your understanding, or else leave that place. Um, God Almighty has not forced you to live in a particular land where you're not comfortable because of its laws. It's your choice to be there. If you don't want to follow the norms, the laws of the land, well, find a place where you the laws are more acceptable to you. So, what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to the question of nikah, uh, most certainly we should solemnize the nikah, conduct it in the manner we have been required in our religion through the sunnah practice that we know of. It takes a certain form and we go through certain formalities. However, the requirement of the land is that you also get your marriage registered, which all Muslims must do because the land, the country that they are a part of, makes it mandatory to do it. If it is not mandatory, it's optional, then obviously you can exercise your option. But if it is mandatory, as I said, the Quran makes it binding on us to Atiyullah wa Atiyur Rasul wa ulul amri minkum. Not only obey God and the Messenger, but those in authority amongst you also. So the system has to be followed. And obviously, there is nothing that stops, nothing in our religion that stops us from getting our nikahs registered in the local union councils or whatever the arrangement over there is. Um, in our country, Pakistan, we get our nikahs registered. We have a form that is filled, and there are many details of it. None of these things were there at the time of the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him. The nikah would used to be conducted verbally in the presence of people who were witnesses. But we, in the later times, have found it useful that this formality is written and there is registration done so that the couple, the new couple, becomes a part of the society and is known to everybody else as a couple, as a family. So that's the first part. That's the second question. The first question, you see, the question of getting married to somebody who is not a Muslim is clear as far as a marriage between a Muslim man and a non-Muslim woman is concerned. In this case, there are two requirements. A, the Muslim woman whom the non-Muslim woman whom a Muslim wants to get married to should not be a polytheist. That is, her faith should not have anything that you feel is going to cause her to ascribe partners to God. Obviously, a question arises that when we know that Christians do claim that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, why should we then be allowed to marry to women belonging to that community? Well, the answer is that there's something called the spirit, and there is another aspect which is the law. According to the law, if an individual himself, herself says that I am a monotheist and what I'm doing is not against monotheism, then officially the person is a monotheist according to the Quran, because the Quran does distinguish between the polytheists of the Arabian Peninsula and the people of the book, despite the fact that the Quran does mention the fact that the people of the book were also indulged in polytheism in the Arabian Peninsula. The second condition is that the lady should be chaste, should not be involved in extramarital relationship. If these two conditions are satisfied, then a Muslim man is allowed to get married to such a woman. However, about the converse possibility that there is a Muslim woman who is looking into the possibility of getting married to a non-Muslim man, there is no clear permission mentioned in the Quran. In Surah Maida, the 5th chapter, if I'm not wrong, verse 5, or is it 4 or 5, the Almighty mentions that the chaste women from amongst the people of the book have been made halal for Muslim men if they want to get married to them. The other possibility has not been mentioned. So there are many Muslim scholars who were led to believe, to form opinion, that this permission is not allowed to non-Muslim, to Muslim women. The fact of the matter is that it's not mentioned. My own inclination has been that when it's not mentioned, then it's more likely that it's not allowed. But, there is a difference. It's not specifically, clearly mentioned that women are not allowed that possibility. There is another verse in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah. Probably it's somewhere in the 200 and something verse. Let's say, try to find it around 222, which says that Muslims should not get married. Muslim men should not get married to polytheist women, even though they enjoy a good status. They have a good status in the society. A slave girl who is a believer is much better than a free lady who enjoys respect in the society. Likewise, the Almighty says, do not get your women married to a polytheist, a man who is a polytheist. A slave is much better than a free man, even though you like that free man. Now, in this particular verse, the Almighty is mentioning both men and women and is stressing upon only one thing, and that is that you cannot get married to a person who is polytheist, whether man or a woman. What I'm trying to say is that even though I still have an inclination that the permission allowed to Muslim men probably is not available to Muslim women, but because it has not been specifically mentioned, and there is a tendency amongst Muslim girls to get married to non-Muslim boys, men, try to stop them from doing it. Try to convince your daughters, your sisters, to first get the man that they are inclined to get married to convert to Islam. But if you find that it's not happening, then don't say that it's an illegitimate relationship. Do not sever, do not break your contacts with these Muslim girls, ladies. Help them in influencing their husbands that they have gotten married to come close to Islam. Pray for them, but don't ever you know decide to just completely cut off your relationship with them, because that would really mean that all chances of bringing the person close to Islam would be destroyed, and you will also in the process put in danger the faith of the lady as well.
But Dr. Saab, may I just add that simultaneously the value of women, especially mother, is that she is this institution of knowledge where she is the one who actually trains generations. So it feels a little odd that a man can marry a non-Muslim, even if it's monotheist woman, who is supposed to be training the future generation, and yet the reverse would preclude the Muslim woman who could actually convert the entire generation of that couple into a very Muslim generation. So I've always had a little bit of a struggle intellectually in accepting that a Muslim woman marrying a Muslim woman for a man, the reverse, would have issues, because if the woman is Muslim, her generation would definitely be affected as such.
I share your concern. I have the same problem in intellectually understanding this particular aspect of the claim. And when I was trying to explain the reason for it in the text, uh, the reason is not very clear. I'm just saying that when you read the text, you should be honest and objective in understanding the text. And I've mentioned objectively the fact that on the one hand, there seems to be a reason to believe that it's allowing men and not women, but then it's not absolutely clear. It's not black and white. Uh, and there are people who explain that it was something that was allowed because at the time when Muslim civilization was predominant, if in such cases, in such a scenario, if a Muslim man gets married to a non-Muslim woman who comes to this society, she gets influenced. Uh, Probably that is true, but we've never experienced it because we've never seen a time when Muslim culture was the predominant culture of the world. Right now, I absolutely agree with you that a mother is more likely to influence children than the father. So, as I said, I just presented my understanding of the text, but I would be very strongly against uh, religious parents to just cut off their ties with their daughters if they take a decision to get married to a non-Muslim man without him converting. When I believe that, we should give the person a chance. We should try to influence him positively through our good behavior, through our good relationship, and that's about it.
Thank you very much, everyone. We have very well conversation in a two-way, and we are really obliged and thankful to Dr. Khalid Zaheer. And I had some couple of quick announcements. Any participant, you are advised to join our WhatsApp group for dedicated for this class session, and we will be sharing the related question answer and also some of the files which Dr. Shah will send to us, and we will share via the group as well. So this WhatsApp group is more like a rostrum of the class where we will be engaging and doing all things related to the class. Like we are asking our questions to Dr. Saab, so we can ask these questions on our WhatsApp group as well. We can save the time as well. And also, some people they ask me about they cannot send the message by using the question answer window on a software. So I would like to say if you want to enjoy this software where we are at the moment, then you should log in on laptop or Microsoft based laptop or might be MacBook. Then you can see all windows, chat room, question answer window, and also you will have a proper dashboard. Unlikely the if you are using or listening on a smartphone, then you will have very limited things to use it. So that's very important to say. The third and last thing is you must share this link to your friends and family so they can also join this class. And also, the recording of every session will be emailed after 1 2 hours of closing the whole session every week. So if somebody has missed any part of the conversation of our session, you can access that recording link as well. Jazakallah khair. I wish you all the best and we'll see you in the next session. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Inshallah. Assalamu
Wa alaikum assalam.